Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week, we welcome the artist and co-creator of Lazarus to the show. It's Michael Lark. Thanks for coming on the show, Michael.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, the fourth arc of Lazarus just wrapped a couple weeks ago, which means we're in the early stages of the gap between issues. And I know this one's like a little bit longer. The book's not coming back until May. But one thing I've always been curious about books like yours that take what is it, like break, trade, break, issue back, like kind of schedule. I've always been interested. Do you actually get a break in that period, or do you pretty much immediately jump onto the next arc?
No, I'm already working on issue 22 right now.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just finished it. I'm going to be doing the covers again, and I just finished doing the cover today for that.
Mm-hmm.
It takes me about, we're changing our schedule a little bit, and if this is getting into too detailed,
there's no level of details that are too deep.
Yeah, we're changing the schedule around because Lazarus is a real labor-intensive book art-wise, and I think it's probably pretty labor-intensive for Greg as well. But that doesn't show itself in our schedule. Whereas the art, when the art gets labor-intensive, it definitely affects our schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we've kind of established this level of realism and stuff in our universe that there's not really a whole lot of ways I can cut corners, and there's a lot of preliminary work that goes into every issue. So it takes me, about 6 weeks to do a 22-page issue. When Greg throws at me something like he did with issue 21, where we realized we were going to have to go up to 30 pages, that's adding like another 2 weeks worth of work onto a book for me. Anyway, we're switching now to where, we hadn't been, really being, I don't know. What we're doing now is we're going to be coming out the same, I think it's the third Wednesday of every month.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to get like a big head start and get started drawing the issues so that by the time we hit that last issue of the story arc, I'll be right at the deadline. But, that way I can take the 6 weeks and I don't have to kill myself trying to do the issues. We were putting in a lot of hours.
Yeah.
I've got an assistant who helps me out with inking, and then I've got another assistant who does a lot of the digital paste up work, and she also does our lettering.
Mm-hmm.
And, between the three of us, we end up having to put in a lot of hours towards the end of a deadline on any given issue.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully this will relieve some of that stress for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one thing I was going to ask you about is I know that, when you first came in, like there was two things. You guys were intending, I think you were thinking it was going to take you about 5 weeks per issue. And then beyond that, one thing you had mentioned in the last time we talked, which is back into previous life for me and a couple years ago for both of us, you had said that like there were like little things like there'd be like a motorcycle for like, let's say Joaquin from the Moray family. And like, let's say he has a motorcycle. What does it run on? Like you have to be realistic about it. How is it working and everything? And like, is it kind of like that level of granularity where you're trying to figure those things out that's taking a bit more time than you originally anticipated, or is it other things?
Well, yeah, it's mostly that. There's a lot of preliminary design work that goes into it.
Yeah.
There's some stuff that I can say, okay, this exists in our world, and it would still look the same.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other things like there's been a lot of stuff in hospitals, and so there's not only no, I have to do like an ICU, but it's an ICU that's in this like research facility of the future.
Right.
So, there's a lot of, you can't just throw regular hospital stuff in there. It's got to be kind of, slightly more techy looking hospital stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, somebody has to design all that stuff.
Right.
And, Eric Troutman he does a lot of he does all the interface design. Anytime you see a computer interface or, any kind of like video screen or something like that, the design of those is all done by Eric. That's what he does. He's really, really good at it where I'm not. And, so he'll do that stuff. Meanwhile, while he's working on those, I'm working on, what does the interior of the hot satellite or not satellite, guided missile bunker look like?
Right.
That what kind of screens do they have? Blah blah blah. And yeah, I mean, between me and Eric and Greg, we kind of kill ourselves over that stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I remember looking at. I think this was when you guys were working on the first hardcover, and like Greg tweeted out an image. I think it was Greg, or maybe it was Eric, of like a map that they'd been working on, where they're like mapping out the entire world and all the families who would control what area. And it's like I think a lot of readers don't realize like the level of depth that you guys go to on this book, because creator owned, I think by itself means that you're going to be putting a little bit more effort into it than not effort, but a little bit more depth into the book than you might have if it was a for hire book. But even beyond that, like Lazarus, you guys are going to some pretty crazy levels.
Yeah, the first project I did at DC was a retro sci-fi book, Terminal City. And when I got done doing that, I vowed I would never do sci-fi again. and here I am. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work. I love doing that stuff. I wish I had more time to do it.
Yeah.
There's maybe that's always the case with any kind of endeavor like this. You always wish you had more time or more pages. But yeah, I really do enjoy doing that stuff. It's really fun. It's just always like, oh my God, we got to get this done so I can actually draw pages,
Yeah. Well, you said you're doing covers again, and I know that Owen Freeman had been doing them, I think it was since issue 10 or so. And he's been doing a great job. But so why was it just a scheduling thing, the reason why you stepped back and Owen stepped in?
Well, there's budget considerations as well. The nature of the industry and the nature of the market is that sales fall.
Right.
And so, every month we're selling, fewer copies than we did the month before. And just, we kind of tightening our belt a little bit. Mm-hmm. But also, at the same time, we kind of had some notions about unifying the design in certain ways. And I had some ideas of things that I wanted to do.
Sure.
So, Owen's still going to do our trades and our hardbacks.
Right.
And, Owen was totally cool with it. He's a good friend. And so, yeah, I think it's going to work out for everybody. I mean, I had been really struggling with the covers the first time around because, I couldn't find a color approach that I was happy with. Mm-hmm. And in the year since then, or however long it's been, I've kind of come up with some ideas for ways that I want to color it, and that I think are appropriate for my style. So we're gonna see how this experiment works.
That's one thing I'm really curious about, because this is this is your first creator-owned project, right?
No, No, the first couple of things I ever did were creator-owned, and then I did a couple of things at Vertigo. I did Scene of the Crime and Terminal City were both creator-owned.
Oh, okay. But this, it's definitely your biggest project you've taken on, and it's just, it's massive and everything. But I'm curious, as you've moved along, do you feel like you've I don't know. I mean, obviously, you're perpetually learning as you're working on a book, but do you feel like it's kind of because it's so big that you've taken maybe like the learning curve has been a little bit bigger, and that you've been kind of relearning the way you do things to a certain degree because it's an entirely different kind of realm almost?
Yeah, no, not because of that. I mean, I think that's just a natural state for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. There may be some artists who are like, okay, this is how you draw a skateboard.
Right.
But I'm going to have to figure out how to draw a skateboard every time I draw a skateboard. Mm-hmm. And, I'm constantly pushing myself and constantly trying to figure out better ways to do it. I mean, I'm probably, the least happy with my artwork of anybody on the planet. And, all I see is all the things I got wrong. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just a constant state of trying to fix that.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I always find it's really interesting about artists. And I guess it makes sense. And I suppose if I looked at my my writing, I had probably judged myself. Actually, I do horribly. But it is interesting how artists look back at their own work and they're just like, I don't know. I mean, not that it's the only thing you see, but you probably pretty much all you see is your mistakes.
Yeah, at first, yeah, I go through kind of a cycle where it's like as soon as I get done with it, I just never want to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I like to the point that I like when I get my comp copies of Lazarus, I don't even like open the envelopes that they're in. I just chuck them in the back of a closet. But a year later, I might pull out an issue. Maybe not a year, maybe a little longer than that. But I'll pull out something and I'll go, oh, hey, there were a couple things I got right here, and start, I kind of see it through a more positive lens. I can detach myself from it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, but I absolutely think that's true. I mean, there was a website that was having Alex Toth do commentary on some of his own work, do kind of annotations on it, and he would take this stuff that I always just thought was absolute genius, and his annotations were just all about how he screwed it up and all the things he did wrong. But then I would also read it and go, oh, wow, he's right. He could have done that different, I think we all do that. We all do that to some extent. It's never going to be as pure as what we see in our head.
Mm-hmm. No.
And you and I are both baseball fans, and the analogy that I always use is that, a really good all-star hitter fails 70% of the time.
Right.
So, if I'm happy with one or two panels on a page, then I'm doing really good.
Mm-hmm. I do think that's really interesting because I had spoken with, I do these art features on my site where, I break down pages with individual artists.
Fun.
Yeah. So we break down the pages and we actually talk about like the panels and how they made choices and all these different things. And one artist, and I'm not going to name names or anything, we worked on one of these art features for a good while. And it got to the point where he just basically had to quit because he was getting so critical about his own work. He was having a hard time doing it. And I totally don't blame him. Like it is just interesting though, because it's like, I think, I look at, an issue of Lazarus or like, I don't know, like an issue of like the Fade Out, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips's book. And all I see is like amazing. And I bet, if you ask Sean Phillips, he'd probably just be like, I did that wrong. Man, I did that. I mean, I guess it was pretty good here, but I did that wrong. And it is
actually Sean's not like that.
Really?
I'm not saying he wouldn't be like, oh yeah, it's all brilliant. But Sean always kind of comes across to me like he's just like, yeah, I got it done. I got the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And he has this kind of workman-like attitude. Yeah, well, he's very modest, yes, but he's also kind of got this workman-like attitude about the way he creates his comics. That he knows how to tell a story. It's just I think it's something intuitive for him. He's amazing.
He also seems like a Terminator. He seems really fast. Like it seems like he's always putting work out, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah. He's amazing. I have a really, really deep-seated envy of Sean's ability to do such great work so quickly.
Well, we won't talk anymore about him then. But
no, Sean's a friend, so it's not a problem. He knows how I feel. We've talked about it.
Well, I did want to talk about the way you work because I find it to be really interesting because, a lot of people these days, they work pure digital or they work pure traditional or they work some combination of both. But I think you might be the only person I know who actually does. If I remember correctly, you pretty much everything you do to start with like setup is digital, but then you finish everything traditionally. But so what's your process for putting an issue of Lazarus together?
Okay, I start off, I use reference for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, on a book like Lazarus, where so much of the world is invented and has to be designed, that means that I end up building a lot of models, a lot of 3D models.
Right.
And so what an issue usually starts off with is going through and finding all the new sets and gadgets and props and things like that need to be designed. And I work on those, and I have a guy who builds models for me, builds SketchUp models for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of do all my designs and get those to him and get him working on building the models. And then I start going through and scene by scene, usually breaking down a scene into, panels and pages. Greg does that. But then, I kind of shuffle things around a little bit usually. And, I draw a lot of little boxes. I draw a lot of little rectangles with other little rectangles inside of them. And, there's a lot of notes. There's very little drawing at that point aside from the rectangles, but there's a lot of notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I start referencing everything. Then I start putting all the reference together for the things that need to be drawn in each panel. Like I said, it's usually more based on notes. Sometimes I have to sketch things out, but it's more based on like knowing what angle I want, what needs to be in the shot, and then kind of building the reference together to create it.
Is that kind of like I've heard artists call it like the problem solving phase?
It's all problem solving, but yes. No, well, I mean, to be honest, it is. I love puzzles. I love doing any kind of puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. That's what putting the comics page together is. It's a puzzle. And, you start out with a big picture. You look at how the whole issue goes together, and you kind of, I do like a one-page like breakdown of the issue where I kind of color code like the scenes and locations so I can kind of get an overview of the issue and see how it's balancing. And then you start working into smaller and smaller units until you get down to where you're, designing individual panels
mm-hmm.
within pages. But, it all has to fit together. There are certain constraints you've got within each page and within each book that you have to figure out how to make all that work.
Right.
You can't just do every panel. I might have an 8-panel page, and in my mind's eye, as I read the script, every panel would look great. It's like a big horizontal 1/3 of the page shot,
mm-hmm.
but I can't do that. So I have to, you can't just do the first thing that pops into your head. So you have to start, kind of looking at various solutions and what kind of variables you can throw in there with the way the script's written and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So once you actually get past like the notes and everything, like, and that's all digital, right? You're doing those. Are you doing those notes digitally, or how are you?
Actually, at that point, I'm working on. I print out the script, and I put it in a notebook, and I draw. Do my sketches on the back side of the facing page.
Interesting.
Of the script, yeah, and I just, that's where I do it all is by hand.
Mm-hmm.
But then, once I start laying things out, then I go into the digital because
mm-hmm.
I'm using a lot of 3D models. Like I said, I've got the lettering done by that point. Like I know what lettering is going to go on the pages, so I can kind of space things out and see how much space the lettering's taking up. And then I start laying everything out digitally that way.
Mm-hmm.
And sketching digitally and putting it all together. And then I get all the reference, I get everything together, and then I draw on the finished page. I'll print out like blue lines
mm-hmm.
or, guides for myself and start working on the finished page.
And I know that like you had said before that like a big reason for doing the final pages traditionally is because you can then sell the original art. And that's one thing I think is really interesting because when you're a digital artist, you give up that other part of your income. It's like something that just kind of goes away. But do you think if that wasn't a factor, if like the original art sales part wasn't a factor, do you think you'd go all digital, or do you prefer the more tangible feel of like working with pen and ink and everything like that?
Yeah, most of my brush and ink work is just kind of accidental, and it's just accidental is the best word I can think of to describe it. And you can't replicate that with digital brushes. You can't. There's just not that infinite variability that you have with working with real tools and the texture of paper and especially a brush. I work with a lot of pens too. But yeah, there's just something about when I scan my lines
mm-hmm.
and look at them on the computer, they look different from anything I've ever tried to do digitally.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's more the reason than selling the art. Selling the art's just a happy byproduct of that.
Sure. So when you say like an accident, I mean, is it just that like when you're working traditionally, like you kind of have a more raw element? Like because I know a lot.
I do, yes.
Yeah, because I know a lot of digital artists, like they have a tendency of like, I know that people can fall down the rabbit hole of just kind of like noodling, like undo and fix this and undo and fix this.
Yeah.
And like it seems like you kind of to a certain degree can lose some of the rawness if you focus so much on getting everything perfect. And is that what you mean by the accidental nature?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's also just like a physical accidents. Like, I don't have the best brush control, and I don't use the best brushes, and so there's no point in my using the best brushes because I don't have a lot of brush control. So a lot of just physical happy accidents happen by the way I move my hand, the way the brush hits the paper. Angles, all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's funny that you say that, like, that you have very little brush control. And I'm just like, I look through an issue of Lazarus, not to make myself seem like a fanboy or something like that. And I'm just like, God damn, this guy's a wizard. How does he do this?
Yeah, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, probably. But, yeah, no, I look at people who can really use a brush, and I'm just like, oh, my God. I envy that ability, but yeah, I just kind of stumble my way through it. I never learned how to do that properly, and I taught myself to use a brush on the job, so there was never any time to really learn the right way to do it, and I think I developed a lot of bad habits, and I just kind of do my best to make those work for me.
Yeah, but I mean, to use another baseball reference, I mean, it's like, I don't know, not that he was a perfect player or something like that, but I mean, Mickey Tettleton, like that dude hit like an idiot. Like his stance was ridiculous, but he hit bombs. He could hit some serious home runs. Yeah. And so like, I don't know. I mean, I think to a certain degree with whether you're talking about baseball or like, shooting a basketball or like, form while you're drawing, it kind of seems like you just got to find what works for you and then make it work from there. And it kind of seems like, I mean, obviously you found something that works for you, but it seems like, what may not appear to be brush control for most people, it seems like whatever you're doing fits for the style that you're going for.
Well, you don't know what style I'm going for. You're just seeing the happy accident,
You made a hell of a career out of
I don't know if you can say that. I mean, there's a lot of times when I start putting the brush down on the paper that I don't know how that piece of art's going to come out. I don't really have any idea. Well, I shouldn't say I don't have any idea, but it could change as I'm working on it. I could see there might be something that I'm just like, oh, I like the way that feels. I'm going to keep doing that. And I can't do that with a computer.
Right. So you're a very feel-oriented artist.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think of it kind of like jazz music. There's a chord progression and there's a melodic structure to whatever the pieces that you're playing, but then it's up to each artist in the ensemble to improvise on that. And it's kind of what I'm doing when I'm inking. I mean, I know what the structure is. I've got all my guides in place. I've got, done all my reference. I know where everything's going to go. I just don't know quite how it's going to get there. And it's kind of like, jumping in feet first with my eyes closed. And it was terrifying when I first started doing it, but now I find it kind of liberating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like, that's kind of just been how you have felt your entire career, more or less, right?
No, if you look at my early stuff, it's very, very controlled.
Really?
I kind of wanted to hide myself from the finished product. I didn't want any of me to show in it. I wanted it to just be those lines and shapes, I don't know if I'm describing that well, but it was real cold, I thought, and just overly controlled. But the art that I always liked was the stuff that was more, a little more free and a little more improvisational and sketchy, I guess. But I don't really see it as sketchy myself. Sketches are a completely different thing, but definitely more improvisational. I've always liked artists like that. And at some point, I was like, why am I trying to do my version, do this controlled version of what should be loose and free? I mean, all my inspirations were, people who were just doing kind of loose, free brushwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I just decided that it was time to stop faking it.
Mm-hmm. So when did you, if in the beginning of your career, you were much more controlled, at what point do you feel like you kind of started letting go and engaging that more raw side?
I think on Gotham Central,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there was one particular issue of Gotham Central. I think it was number 12. It was the one with the Joker's sniper rifle sticking out the window on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Where, I don't know, something just clicked into place for me with the way I was inking that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt really good. I mean, I think the beginning of it was when, we're going to go back to Sean Phillips again, when Sean inked me on Scene of the Crime.
Mm-hmm.
He was just like, he was the shit as far as I was concerned at that point, especially. I mean, he was doing Hellblazer at the time, and I was just in awe of what he was doing on that book. The simplicity and the real loose quality of the brushwork. And so I wasn't happy with my inking on it. And I was talking to our editor, and she said, well, who would you like? And I was like, oh, ha-ha, Sean Phillips, ha-ha-ha. And she goes, okay. And so, like a week later, I think Sean had said he would do it. And then when I would get the pages back and look at what Sean had done over my pencils, just the way a different artist saw what I was trying to do just kind of broke my universe. And I just started rethinking everything I was doing.
Yeah, it kind of like unlocked your brain basically for what you really wanted for your own art.
Yeah, I mean, those pages that he inked are just so gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, that's not at all what I would have done, but it's exactly what I wanted,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I need to learn how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's really interesting because, you'd mentioned you use SketchUp for models for like buildings and interiors and things like that.
Yeah.
And so you use that, but you also so it's a very controlled element. But then on the flip side, like your inking and everything, you're much more instinctual and, like, as you said, accidental. And I think it is kind of interesting that you have kind of like this much more controlled side, and then you have this raw side that comes together to be your art. It's fascinating.
It is a little bipolar. You're right. Like I said, all that beginning stuff is creating the framework on which to hang the art. I mean, you don't see those models.
No, not at all. I don't even think about it.
Nobody's going to see those. What you're going to see is my inks, and so that's the part I need to have. I need to have enough of a foundation to where I can let go of that control.
Yeah.
I mean, it does no good to try to be loose and stuff like that if you have no plan going into it. I mean, you kind of have to know the rules before you can break them.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like that's the foundation, and then you build the really awesome like house on top of it. But I think it's really like for SketchUp, like I mean, you like. That's one thing about Lazarus is, especially now that we're kind of getting out in the world, like I imagine like SketchUp seems like it's probably increasingly essential given all the different places the book is taking you.
Oh, it's absolutely essential. I've been using it since I started using it on Gotham Center. No, I started using it on Daredevil.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was working on Terminal City, the first book I did at Vertigo, it was that sci-fi thing. And I remember thinking then, I mean, that was like 95.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, God, I wish I had a computer program where I could just real easy build these buildings and then, blah, 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 blah. And, now I have it. You know, my wish came true. And so, yeah, it's absolutely essential. I love it. It's a fantastic tool. Fantastic. Because I was always thinking that way anyway. Like when I was working on Gotham Central, I had a map of the squad room. I knew where everybody was sitting. I knew what was on what desks and stuff. I had drawn perspective drawings of it from like every corner of the room just to, you know, make sure everything fit right and stuff. And, you know, as I was laying out pages, I'd have that map that I had drawn and kind of would picture where the camera was placed. And so now I can build that in 3 dimensions and actually do that.
Well, and it provides, I mean, especially with like, you know, like Lazarus, like you were talking about the, you know, the place that Malcolm Carlisle is right now, where he's being treated and everything. Yeah. And like you have that room and you have that from tons of different angles and you have that over and over and over. And it is interesting. Like it allows like a visual consistency that, you know, I mean, like when you're watching sci-fi, like a sci-fi movie or something like that, if something looks fake and looks just like it's not, you know, when it doesn't look real, it takes you out of the story. And I think that something like SketchUp, it seems like it allows for a visual consistency that won't take the reader out of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to maintain that, you know, before I did SketchUp. You know, that was always work. It was a lot more work. Yeah. It was a lot more work. I mean, perspective drawing is a lot of work, and especially when you're doing perspective drawing when you're doing 2-point perspectives and stuff where the vanishing points would be, you know, 3 feet over to your left and 6 feet over to your right. That's going to be a lot of work to get that done. And so, you know, yeah, it definitely makes it a lot easier doing it this way. And then, you know, when I do go in and draw it, I'm not as I don't need to be as mechanical about that drawing because, you know, I've got those guys already in place and stuff. Yeah.
Well, that was one thing I wanted to ask because, like, it seems like, I mean, obviously a lot of the digital tools you're working with right now are essential for varying reasons, but I don't know what all you use exactly, but how much easier has it made things for you to have those options available? Not just SketchUp, but just like, you know, like the stuff you use to like initially lay it out and things like that. Like, is that just something like you couldn't imagine going back to purely traditional at this point?
I think it'd be hard. It's made the drawing easier. But, you know, it still takes me the same amount of time to do an issue.
Right.
Because I end up doing all that work on the front end that I wasn't doing before. I mean, I was just doing it a different way, maybe.
Right.
But it's definitely, once I get to the drawing stage, I feel a lot more confident. I feel a lot more secure in what I'm drawing. I feel a lot more comfortable that things are accurate, like you were just saying, things like that.
Is there a part of your process, like, is it the drawing that takes the most amount of time, or is like what
No, that takes the least amount of time.
That's interesting.
The drawing takes the least amount of time. I mean, by the time I'm inking a page, it'll take me, depending on the page. I mean, granted, I have an assistant helping me with you know, some of the background stuff on pretty much every page, but by the time I sit down to ink, it'll take me maybe 4 to 6 hours to do a page.
Wow.
But all that preliminary stuff will take, you know, per page, it'll take me about that long. Yeah, and I mean, on some pages I can ink a lot faster than that, even. I mean, that's a, you know, yeah, I mean, I would say 3 to 6 hours tops to actually draw the page, but it takes me, you know, 12 to 18 hours to do each individual page. So there's a lot of preliminary work.
Right.
You know, the page has to be laid out, has to be lettered, but the thinking time, there's a lot too. You know, I've had to learn that it's okay to go do other stuff and let my brain work, and that I'm still working. You know, There's a lot of that goes on when I'm at that stage. There's a lot of doing the laundry and, you know, taking walks or buying groceries. but my brain is still like processing everything.
I find that almost invariably when I find a really great solution for a problem I'm having in an article, it's almost always in the shower, and which is unfortunate because I'm all wet and I don't have anything near me that I can write with. And so I have to like hope that I remember by the time I get out of the shower, which shouldn't be difficult, but sometimes strangely is.
Yeah, mine are there, and right as I'm falling asleep.
I've had that too. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, because your brain's like all loosey-goosey and letting everything in, and you're not trying to control anything, and you're not bound by rules,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that's when I can see a page like clearly drawn in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a matter of whether or not I can remember it enough after I wake up.
So you don't actually get up and just be like, I got to do something with this, or at least like put this down a little bit on paper or something like that?
I have, but not always. I usually kind of trust myself. If it's really a good idea and not just like something that while I'm half asleep I think is a good idea, I'll remember it.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll like typically send myself an email as like a note, and then hope in the morning I have any idea what my like sleep addled brain wrote down into an email. And every once in a while I know, which is that's a big win for me. But I think it's really fascinating. Like you were saying, like you were breaking down kind of like the time breakdown for like how long each aspect takes you. And I think it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of artists, and some, layouts take like the longest by far. And sometimes like, like the stuff you're talking about, just kind of like the theorizing and figuring out the page mentally part takes the longest for them. And other ones, drawing takes the longest. And I just find it really interesting that like, it is, for all intents and purposes, the same act being done by multiple different people, but everyone has such a wildly different approach. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's, all our brains work different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think you might be one of the first people I've spoken to, and maybe I'm just like completely wrong about that, but one of the first people I've spoken to that the drawing phase is actually like one of the quickest parts of it.
Maybe it only feels that way because that's the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it only feels like that's the quickest part. Because as I'm talking to you about it, I'm like, well, I try to do about a page a day, but it's hard for me to answer because there's a lot of work that happens before that page a day starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's all that, I've got to design a bunker and an ICU and a top secret futuristic research facility.
Mm-hmm.
That there's no page drawing going on there. There's, that's a whole different job.
Right. So it's kind of like the design the bunker and setting up the page and all that stuff. That's like you setting up, like, getting the recipe out and then putting all the ingredients together. And then by the time you get to the page, that's when you get to eat your meal effectively.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good description.
Yeah, well, I actually am heartened to hear, like, I know that, like, a lot of times, like, the act of drawing can be kind of a slog, but, I like that you describe it as still fun because, I don't know, I guess I don't hear it that often. Like, it can be a job, but at the same time, it's like, it's something you really like to do. I don't know if you necessarily got into comic art because you were like looking to get super rich, but it seems like I'm glad to hear that you still have fun with it.
Well, my God, why would you do it if it wasn't fun?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in this business to have done a drawing, then you're going to be miserable because that is such a tiny little infinitesimal fraction of what you do. You're just going to be a miserable person. Everything else is going to be heartache.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't enjoy the process, then why do it?
Right.
Go do a job where you're going to get rich. If all you want is that end result, just go make some money.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's fantastic. I mean, when I was growing up, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I wanted to be a comic artist, except for I am like horrifically terrible at it. But like I would spend like all my like waking hours that I wasn't at school and stuff drawing, and well, in between watching cartoons and stuff. But I would draw, and I just never seemed to improve. And like that's one of the reasons why I'm like super like impressed by artists is I just find it so amazing that you guys can, you can get a script or you can come up with this idea in your head and you can realize it. And it's hard for me to not imagine that being fun, but I guess I've never done it for a living. Anyways.
It's a blast.
Yeah.
It's the most fun thing in the world. I mean, not the most fun thing. There are a couple things probably that are more fun, but
Right.
Yeah, I'm so lucky that I get paid to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I did my first I meet young artists now who want to know about breaking in the business, and I didn't try to break into the business. I just wanted to get my comics published. I just wanted somebody to publish it. I didn't care if I made money at it. I think my first 5-issue miniseries my 5-issue creator-owned, terribly written miniseries that I did, I think I got $100 for all 5 issues. And I meet these people now who are like, they're not going to do anything until they're making, a reasonable page rate and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, how do you learn? I mean, what is that the only reason you're doing this? Because if it is, then you're off to you're going to have a sad life. You're going to be unhappy. I mean, that's, like I said, that's such a small portion of what you do. Or what we do.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, if I remember correctly, you didn't come up like as a big comic fan. You were kind of more into the alt comics when you got into college and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like to a certain degree, like the mentality, not to make this a thing about the comic reader, but I think the mentality, like you grew up during a time where you had people that were just making comics because they were like, making comics was kind of this radical, cool thing you could do. And you do it because like you have a story to tell and you release it in like a zine or you release it in like a self-published comic and you can do that. And now it kind of seems like a lot of people are like kind of commodifying the business to a certain degree. And I wonder if that's just a difference in mentality for like the artists who are breaking in now versus when you were growing up on the books being dropped back then. It's just kind of a different world.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that there's still the option to do that, like through the internet. I don't know how many people are taking advantage of that. Maybe more than I realize. But I really admire like the web cartoonists that I know. I think those people, a lot of them starting out are doing it with that mentality.
Yeah.
I think that it's a really I don't know about. I mean, I think that the fact that we've got so many comic book movies and that things like The Walking Dead are becoming, super successful. That's not a traditional comic book story. I think that there are a lot of us, I mean, myself included, who are saying, okay, how can I do that? How can I continue to make a living doing this and be comfortable doing it? Yeah. But I think that if that's your entire reason for wanting to do it,
right,
then if all you're looking at is that reward, I think you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah. Well, to get back more to like, the craft of the work and everything like that. One thing I think is really interesting about Lazarus, and not that any comic has ever really one tone or anything like that, but like when Lazarus does violent, it gets really violent. Like at the in issue number 21 with the whole bunker scene, like it ends with like Forever covered with like a blast door, basically. Like, I mean, she's not dead because it's Forever, but I mean, she's pretty jacked up. And so when it gets violent, it gets really violent. But like when there's one of my favorite storylines was the whole Forever as a young girl dealing with Marisol storyline. And I thought that was really fantastic, but it was filled with all these really quiet and small, subtle moments. But for you as an artist, does having a balance like that where you get to kind of use all of the different parts of your art brain keep you more engaged as an artist?
Oh, absolutely. I've done superhero comics, and I've done superhero comics that bored the living shit out of me.
Yeah.
That were nothing but action and with no emotional content whatsoever. And I couldn't be gone from those projects fast enough.
Right.
I hated them by the time I got to the end, especially. there's so much. That's one of the reasons I like working with Greg, is he gives me that variety. You know, I can go from quiet to loud, and I can go within the turn of a page.
It really is amazing. Just flipping through this issue, like I think I've like talked to you before about several of the moments I've just been blown away, but I just like some like the subtleties. It's so great watching or reading the book and seeing like Greg's words working with like your art, and just like how it realizes in just like the small moments. It's like, I don't know. I'm glad that there's more options out there for people like you to tell stories like that, because it's great being able to see your art realized in that way. But I don't know. I mean, it's I guess you're 3 years into the giant creator-owned extravaganza and working with Greg and everything like that. It sounds like you're still really happy that you moved in this direction.
Pardon me?
I said it sounds like you're still really happy you moved in this direction.
Yeah, I am. You know, I'm in no hurry to leave. It's very challenging, but very rewarding. You know, we're really excited about where it's going from here. You know, really excited about, you know, kind of where we left things hanging at the end of the last arc and where we're going to go with this new one. It's you know, it's pretty cool.
I have to admit, I actually, when Conclave was coming to an end, I don't read solicitations, but this one guy that I'm friends with, he sent me the solicit for the last issue of the Conclave, and I was convinced that you guys were going to have Forever Fight Joaquin, and I was gonna write in the nastiest hate mail you guys have ever gotten if that happened, and I'm so glad you didn't, but I almost had to. You guys almost made me do it. Anyways, but you know,
well, yeah, you know, Greg tells me stuff that he's planning on doing in the future, and he gets nasty hate mail from me too. I'm like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm like, no, you can't. Everyone's gonna hate you.
And I'm gonna hate you. Well, I mean, you know, you've been working with these characters for 3 years. I mean, I always find that to be. I'm curious about that. Do you feel like you're like emotionally invested in like the stories of like Forever and like, you know, everyone else that's existing in this world?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to inhabit the characters, or maybe I shouldn't say you. I kind of have to inhabit the characters as I'm drawing them in order to, you know, be able to convey what I think Greg wants me to convey.
Right.
So yeah, you definitely kind of get attached.
Yeah. Well, no, and like it definitely works for us too as readers, because it's like, you know, that was one reason why I thought that that Lift was such an important arc for you guys, is because it really like the first arc was really like all about like setting the tone and setting up the world and everything like that, but Lift really humanized everybody, especially with the Barretts involved. I don't know. I mean, like there are a few comics that that have like an ensemble that I care more about than the characters of Lazarus. And I think it's like I said, it's because of the work you guys are doing. But so I want to ask, we talked before about design, and I know that you had said that was one thing that you want to get more involved with, because, you know, you're going to have the ability to work with like tiling and like the design elements on collections and everything like that. But have you had enough time to be involved with that, or is it really just because of the schedule you haven't been able to do things like that?
I haven't, no. I wanted to do a little bit of redesign work on the covers moving forward, and it turned out that Eric had wanted to do some redesign work as well, and what he wanted to do was pretty much exactly the same as what I wanted to do, so I ended up not having to do it after all. And so yeah, I mean, it really is something that you know, I prefer to focus on telling the story and doing that artwork rather than do it. I mean, I enjoy doing that stuff, and it's a case of I wish I had more time.
Right.
You know, if I had more time, you know, if I ever do my own thing, what I'll probably do is more like single graphic novels,
right,
where I will have the time to do all that stuff. You know, I can design it all once I'm done doing all the art and things like that. well, trying to do that on a monthly book is just monthly comics they're a bitch.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's really hard to get a monthly comic done. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Well, and I don't think the readers really realize that either.
Well, you know, people like Sean Phillips don't make it easy on us either, you know. It's like, well, Sean can do 3 issues a month. Why can't you?
Yeah, I remember there was, do you know who Mike Norton is?
Probably, but the name escapes me at the moment.
He does another Image book called Revival, and the same, like, he was doing an issue of Revival while I mean he was like in the same month there was an issue of Revival, and he did another like X-Men Secret Wars book, and he also does his own like webcomic called Battle Pug, and somehow he was doing like all 3 at the same time, and I'm sure it's some sort of scheduling thing that somebody like me isn't privy to, but I remember seeing like all those things drop in at the same time. I'm like, does he have clones? Like how does he do that? It's unbelievable to me, because I know that schedule can be pretty oppressive and can be pretty tough for you to, you know, like not you, but I mean the royal you, everybody, to like hit those schedules.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm the one who has to spend the most time working on the book, too. Mm-hmm. Greg's got, you know, 3 or more things he's writing at any given time. You know, Eric is working on multiple projects. You know, all my assistants are both working on other projects and stuff, and I'm the one who has to work on the book full time, 52 weeks a year. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of incumbent on me. Usually, you know, if we're running late, it's because for whatever reason I'm running behind on the art.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I take full responsibility for that. And hopefully this new schedule is going to make that easier.
So what is the new schedule exactly?
We're going to be, like I said, we've got a head start because of the publishing break right now. So once we get that head start going, we're gonna do. I mean, I think all the Image books are starting to do this, where it's like do a story arc, take a month off, put out a trade, take a month off, start back up again. Mm-hmm. Or I think a lot of them are. That was the schedule they wanted us to be on. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, while the story arc's coming out, it'll be, you know, 3rd Wednesday every month that it's coming out.
But I mean, like,
we were trying to be on that 5-week schedule for a while.
Oh, okay.
And that's just confusing for the retailers and the readers. So that's why we're taking this long break, to give ourselves a head start on now being able to do, you know, 3rd Wednesday every month.
Well, so one thing I wanted to ask about is like issue number 16, like it was Poison in between Conclave and well, not Poison, it was Curse? Wait, what was it called? Hold on 1 second. I can't remember. Mercy. It was Mercy. It was the issue that was like heavily prose and design oriented, and there was like, you know, you had some art in it, but it wasn't like a traditional issue by any means. Was that kind of done in part that way? Was that entirely story driven, or was that in part to give you kind of like a little bit of a break too?
Initially, I think the plan, I can't remember exactly now. It seems like it was so long ago. It wasn't, but it seems like it was. Initially, the plan on that was to have it be an all-prose issue with spot illustrations by Owen. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember why now, but at the time, I made the case that I didn't think it was a good time to do an all-prose issue, and that I thought it needed to have some story and art in it. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of compromised, which ended up turning into a nightmare. It turned into an absolute nightmare. It was the hardest issue. It was supposed to be kind of a break for me, because I was only supposed to do half an issue. Mm-hmm. And instead, it turned out to be like one of the most labor-intensive, hardest issues we've ever done.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was a nightmare for all of us. I don't think we'll ever do that again.
Well, so, I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly happened?
Oh, just everything that could go wrong went wrong.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was just coordinating everything. And at one point we, you know, because Owen was doing all double page spreads. And at one point we ended up with like me doing an odd number of pages in between his spreads, which messed up his spreads, and so we had to come up with an extra page somewhere, and things like that. It was just like lots of stuff like that. It was crazy.
Yeah. That is interesting, and it does seem like the gap you guys are taking right now, because you guys are releasing like the Lazarus source book, right? That's one thing you guys are going to be dropping. I think it's called the Lazarus source book, and you're going to be.
I believe so, yeah.
And you're dropping like the second hardcover for the book too. It seems I think like this is like a slightly bigger gap, and is that kind of what you're like when you were talking about how you're going to have like going on to the 6-week schedule? Do you think you're going to have like a longer gap than before going forward?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's slightly longer this time. I think that it's like a 4-month gap this time as opposed to a 3-month gap.
Yeah. Like, honestly, I think most readers, I would rather, I've heard from, I remember somebody that used to work at Image had tweeted one time that, that readers ask why they don't have fill-in artists on like even Saga, which is like their one of their most popular books. And like, I think it's interesting how like there is a, it's personally, I'd rather read like I wouldn't want a fill-in artist on Lazarus or on Saga or in any of those books that Image publishes, because I'm buying that comic because it's like the vision of you and Greg and Eric and everybody else, and it's weird that people would want somebody else to interrupt that vision just because they want it sooner. I'm totally fine with gaps.
Well, I mean, that just doesn't work with a creator-owned book. It's one thing you can have a fill-in artist on a Marvel book because that's not a creator-owned book. It's Marvel's book. They can hire whoever they want to draw it. I mean, they can hire whoever they want to flip their Big Macs. And this is not that. This is our book. And I mean, even like just as far as like contracts and paying people goes. I mean, that just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's as simple as most people think it is. But, anyways, well, I want to end with 5 random questions to kind of get to know Michael Lark as a person, not just as an artist. And I know that you have many disparate interests, and it's not. I swear to God, it's not just gonna be baseball. But all right. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, yesterday, Powerball finished. There was a winner. I guess there's multiple winners. 1.5 billion is going to be given out. Let's say you won Powerball, Michael, and you don't have to work anymore. I mean, you can if you want. The world is your oyster. What would you do?
I'd take a long vacation.
Oh yeah. That's the first thing I told my wife too.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Do you think you'd? I mean, it sounds like you'd probably keep drawing.
Probably. I don't have any. I honestly, when I say I don't know, I really don't know. I don't give that any thought.
Okay.
I mean, I look at like getting my son through college and getting myself a house that I like. And other than that, I don't really need a whole lot.
Yeah, I know. It was weird. Like I was talking about that with my wife last night, and I was like, that is actually a strangely difficult question. I was like, I would fix my windshield on my car. I'm like, God, I'm going way too modest things.
Yeah.
All right. So the second question is, I know you originally wanted to go to school for music, and I'm guessing you're still a very big music fan.
Huh?
What do you listen to when you draw, or does it depend on what you're doing?
It depends on what I'm doing. It varies. I mean, I go back to a lot of the same stuff. There's a lot of times, especially when I'm doing like the problem-solving parts we talked about earlier, I can't listen to music. I just am sitting in a quiet house, and I do spend a lot of time just sitting in my house in the quiet. It's probably not the most emotionally and mentally healthy thing to do, but that's just what I end up doing. I sometimes, like, especially when I'm working on like action scenes, I'll find like good soundtrack stuff to listen to. When I'm drawing, I'm all over the map because I want to find something that will engage my brain so that I'm not thinking about what I'm drawing. So that the drawing becomes more of an instinctive thing. And that can be really anything. I mean, really, that's just like whatever I'm in the mood for that day.
Interesting. Well, that makes sense. I mean, especially given the accidental description you had earlier, it's like you want to have your mind occupied so you can like let your instinctual side take the lead.
Yeah, well, it was, I think it was Cezanne that said, if I think all is lost.
Interesting.
And I have a magnet that says that on my refrigerator. It's really behind me every day. But if I think all is lost.
Oh my God. That should be basically my new mantra. My greatest issue. I always call it like the Harper family curse is we overthink everything. So basically
paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, exactly. That is my thing. Paralysis by analysis. Okay, so next question is baseball related. I think I feel like I know the answer to this question, but who is your favorite member of the current Texas Rangers and why?
Oh gosh. You and I probably already talked about this.
Maybe.
I actually have two favorites. I think Adrian Beltre is always going to be my favorite Texas Ranger, no matter what. Adrian Beltre is just my favorite. He's my favorite baseball player, period, hands down. The guy he's an amazing player. He seems like he's having a ball playing baseball every single day.
Yeah.
And but when it's time for business, he's going to conduct his business. I love him, but I also love our new second baseman, Rougned Odor.
Yeah.
He's scrappy. I like him.
Yeah, he was really good. The one thing I have to ask you though is like, and I have never actually found this out. Why doesn't Adrian Beltre like people touching his head? Do you have any idea why that is?
No, I have no idea why. He was a Mariner before he was a Ranger. You should have known the answer to that too.
Well, that wasn't actually a big deal back then because, like, it's kind of, I feel like it's a different thing these days because when he was a Mariner, it was like they're mid like aughts or whatever they call it, like 2004 to like 2007 or something like that. And in like the social media, like Vine meme generation hadn't really taken hold yet. But now that he's got like Elvis Andrus next to him and he's always like trying to bop him on the head and everything like that, people make a huge deal of that on Twitter. And I always like see that and I'm like, why does he do that? Like
I have no idea.
It seems like he's such a chill dude. And then somebody touches his head and he's like, oh no, it is on.
Yeah, there's even a commercial that the Rangers have that runs locally for tickets, where he's having to play Duck Duck Goose with a bunch of little kids, and the kid's going around the circle going Duck 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 Duck, and he gets to Adrian Beltre, and Beltre kind of turns and glares at this little kid.
Oh my God! That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, yeah, Beltre and Odor are my two favorites.
Those are good choices. Okay, next question. I read another interview with you where you made it pretty apparent that you like crime novels. Now, let's say I've never read a good crime novel in my life, which isn't true, but for the purpose of the question, let's say I haven't, and you could only give me one book to convince me that crime novels were great. What would you give me?
Oh, God.
Well, what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
I have favorites.
Let's hear. I'm probably multiple.
Elmore Leonard. Oh, well, it's writers. Elmore Leonard, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Ross McDonald. The usual suspects.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be hard for me to pick just one.
Yeah.
I mean, it would probably have to be an Elmore Leonard novel, but I don't know which one.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm partial to Rum Punch, which was adapted into Jackie Brown by Quentin Tarantino.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. There are so many, and they're all good. They're all great.
Yeah, that's I would say my favorite one I've ever read, and I haven't read nearly. I actually need to read more of all of them, but I guess I don't even know if you called it a crime novel, but I really love L.A. Confidential by James Ellroy. I think that's
that's a good one.
Yeah, it's
I think that the one that I would say is the best one ever is The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler. That is a great book.
Mm-hmm.
And not just a great crime novel. It's a great book.
Well, I think that I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting because like you hear those guys' names and like, especially like Elmore Leonard, it seems like a lot of his stuff gets adapted into movies or TV shows that don't have the same name. And then like people don't really necessarily associate. I mean, like Justified was based off of one of his stories, right?
It was based off of one of his characters.
Oh, one of his characters. Was it Raylan Givens?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it really wasn't based off of actually like one of the stories. That's
I never watched it, so I don't know if they adapted any of the stories or not.
Okay. All right. So last question, and this is total trash talk question. How many games back do you think the Texas Rangers will be from the AL West champion Seattle Mariners when the season ends? This upcoming season.
Oh man, I kind of feel sorry for Mariners fans right now. I know what it's like. We were like that for so long, and we'll be like that again soon. You know, I mean, we may be like that again this year. Who knows? We thought we were going to win it all in 2014, and look at what happened. And I don't think anybody expected the Rangers to do anything last year, and look at what happened. That's the beauty of baseball.
I do think that's really interesting because I remember like I think I'd read like because the Mariners were supposed to be good last year and some people are picking them to go to the World Series, and I must have read like 15 AL West previews and all of them had the Rangers finishing last, and the Rangers ended up actually winning the West, right? Like the Astros got the wild card.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. It's such a baseball is like, you know, for something that like they have the whole Moneyball movement and they have all the analytics that say that this should happen and this should happen and it's down to numbers and everything like that. But like it doesn't happen that way almost ever, really. It's incredible.
Yeah, last season as a Rangers fan was really fun because everything was completely unexpected. Like, you know, everything post All-Star break was just like, you know, bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball, you know, it was like, what, we're winning? What, we got Cole Hamels, huh? You know, it was just like everything was unexpected. I mean, you know, it would have been nice to have had Darvish pitching during all of that. But
I know that's the amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, it was a fun season. I mean, you know, I think it ended when it needed to, but I will never forgive Jose Bautista for his
the bat flip,
his home run. What's that?
The bat flip.
The bat flip, yes.
Yeah.
And just his general whiny baby manness. I can't stand him. I mean, yeah, the Blue Jays went from a team that I really couldn't have cared less about to a team that I absolutely loathe with like a Yankees-like hatred.
I think it's funny how that happens because I don't watch baseball as much as I used to, but I feel like when I like dislike a team in baseball versus other sports, I like straight up hate them. Like I remember when I was a kid.
Yeah. It doesn't matter who's playing for them.
Yeah, exactly. When I was a kid, I remember I was watching the Mariners and the Yankees play, and it was like, you know, dog days of the summer. It was like August, and it was in New York City or in the Bronx and everything, and like Paul O'Neill got up in the face of Dan Wilson, the Mariners catcher, and like I think he ended up like either punching him or shoving him or something like that. And I just remember I was like probably 12, and I got up and I screamed at the TV, "You don't touch Dan Wilson!" And then from that moment on, I was like, Paul O'Neill was like persona non grata. I hated that guy, and like all the Yankees.
That's where I am with Bautista, but really, just like all the Blue Jays last year just seemed like kind of dicks.
Yeah,
and you know, the fans were dicks. That one call in that last game that, you know, the umpires got right, and the fans are just like throwing crap on the field at the players and stuff like that. It's like, oh, what lousy baseball fan.
Yeah.
Sorry if you're a Blue Jays fan and you're listening to this, but man, fans of your team suck.
Well, I think anytime that
your guys are kind of douches too.
I think anytime fans start throwing stuff onto the field like they did, I think it definitely counts as like that's not good fan behavior. Like I don't think that would ever happen in a Mariners game, but I think that's mostly because most Mariners fans are probably like too depressed to do anything about it.
No, but I mean, I think a lot of that environment was created by the players on that team. They were just such a bunch of whiny crybabies.
Yeah,
it was just like every little thing that was just, especially Bautista. He's the worst, man.
Yeah,
that guy's just a jerk.
I don't know if this is necessarily true or if it's just like it's much more public than it used to be, but it seems like every team, like the Kansas City Royals, get so hyped about everything, and not in a bad way. Like I'm totally in support of being like energetic about winning and stuff like that, but it seems like a lot of the players are a lot more like outwardly like boisterous and stuff in like a way that they used to not be in baseball. I don't know if that's just completely off the rails, but I it's just something I've noticed.
I don't know. Better talk to Ty Cobb, see what he has to say about it.
I don't think sharpening your cleats counts as outwardly boisterous. I don't think he was an outwardly boisterous guy. He was kind of violent. Just a little bit. But anyways, well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for answering my 5 questions. And I really appreciate you taking the time from your assuredly busy schedule with Lazarus and everything else.
Oh, no problem, man. It was a pleasure.
And good luck to the Rangers. I hope you guys don't beat the Mariners too many times this season. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Michael Lark, on Lazarus at Image Comics with Greg Rucka. Find more sketch content at Sketch.com. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @SketchedComic. Like us on Facebook at /Sketched. And if you're listening on iTunes, give us a rating or review. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.